The wrench slipped from Sarah Chun's oil-stained fingers as the first explosion lit up the Nevada desert sky. For 3 years, she had worked the graveyard shift at Nellis Air Force Base, invisible among the shadows of aircraft hangars, content to let others assume she was just another washout who couldn't cut it anywhere else. But as enemy missiles screamed toward the base at 2:47 a.m., everything she had buried was about to claw its way to the surface. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Hangar 7 cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as Sarah Chun pulled her faded work jacket tighter against the desert chill. 3 years of night shifts had taught her that 11 p.m. was when the real work began, when the day crew's problems became her problems, when the officers were safely tucked away in their quarters, and when she could finally work in peace without curious eyes questioning her methods. At 29, Sarah had perfected the art of invisibility. Her black hair hung in a simple ponytail, no makeup touched her angular features, and her oversized coveralls hid the lean muscle that came from years of disciplined training. She moved through the hangar with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that drawing attention meant inviting questions she couldn't answer. The other mechanics on the night shift called her the Ghost, partly because she seemed to materialize wherever problems arose, and partly because she rarely spoke unless directly addressed. They assumed she was antisocial, maybe a little strange, but her work was flawless and she never complained about the assignments others avoided. Sarah approached the F-35 Lightning II that had been grounded earlier that day with engine troubles. The day shift had spent 8 hours trying to diagnose the problem, running every standard diagnostic without success. Their supervisor, Master Sergeant Kelly Rodriguez, had left detailed notes about the suspected issues: fuel system contamination, possible sensor malfunction, electronic interference. All wrong. Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's fuselage, feeling for vibrations that others missed. Her fingers found the subtle asymmetry in the engine mount, a microscopic stress fracture that standard diagnostics couldn't detect. She had seen this exact problem before, though not in peacetime maintenance. The fracture pattern was identical to battle damage she had witnessed during her deployment to Syria, when aircraft returned from missions with invisible trauma that only revealed itself under extreme stress. Working methodically, Sarah began disassembling the engine housing. Her movements were precise, economical, guided by an understanding of aircraft systems that went far beyond what any maintenance manual could teach. She had learned these skills in the crucible of combat zones, where mechanical failure meant death and there was no time for uncertainty. As she worked, Sarah's mind wandered to the carefully constructed life she had built at Nellis. Her personnel file listed her as a former Army mechanic with basic certifications, someone who had washed out of advanced training programs and settled for night shift work at a military base. The story was believable because it was partly true. She had been in the Army, she had worked on aircraft, and she had indeed been washed out of a program. What the file didn't mention was that she had washed out of Delta Force selection, not because she lacked the skills, but because she had asked too many questions about a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. A mission where faulty intelligence had led to the deaths of 12 soldiers, including her younger brother Marcus. The investigation that followed had been swift and thorough. Official blame was assigned to tactical errors and equipment failures. The intelligence officer who had provided the false information, Major Patricia Steele, was quietly transferred to a desk job with her record intact. The soldiers who had died were honored as heroes who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Sarah had known better. She had seen the inconsistencies in the briefing materials, noticed the gaps in reconnaissance data, understood that someone had fed them information designed to put them in harm's way. When she tried to raise these concerns, she was told that questioning superior officers was inappropriate. When she persisted, she was removed from the program and given a choice: accept a medical discharge for stress-related concerns, or face court-martial for insubordination. The medical discharge had come with a clean record and full benefits, but also with an unofficial understanding that her military career was over. No elite units would accept someone with psychological red flags in their file. No commanding officers wanted a soldier who questioned authority. Sarah Chun, former staff sergeant and Delta Force candidate, had effectively ceased to exist. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, taking a new name, creating a new identity, and finding work in the only place that would accept her tainted record. The night shift at military installations, where supervisors were more concerned with getting the job done than with asking awkward questions about their workers' backgrounds. The engine housing came apart in her hands, revealing the hairline fracture that had been causing the malfunction. Sarah studied the metal, noting the crystalline structure of the failure point. This wasn't random metal fatigue. This was the result of harmonic vibration, the kind that occurred when aircraft were pushed beyond their normal operational parameters. She had seen this before, during her time with the 75th Ranger Regiment's Aviation Support Unit. Before Delta Force, before the failed mission, before her brother's death, she had been part of a special operations maintenance team that kept helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft operational in the most challenging environments imaginable. Those had been the happiest years of her military career. Working with elite pilots and aircrew, solving complex mechanical problems under pressure, being part of something that mattered. Her commanding officer then had been Captain Michael Torres, a man who valued competence over politics and who had recognized her unusual talents. Torres had been the one to recommend her for Delta Force selection. He had seen her potential, understood that her analytical mind and technical skills could be invaluable in special operations. His recommendation had opened doors that her modest background never could have unlocked. After her discharge, Sarah had tried to contact Torres, hoping he might help her find work in the civilian aerospace industry. She had learned that he had been killed in a helicopter crash 6 months after her departure, along with his entire crew. The official report blamed pilot error, but Sarah had known Torres. He was one of the most skilled aviators she had ever worked with, someone who didn't make the kind of basic mistakes that had supposedly caused the crash. The pattern was becoming clear to her. People who asked uncomfortable questions about certain operations had a tendency to meet unfortunate ends. Equipment failures, pilot errors, training accidents, all perfectly plausible explanations for why troublemakers disappeared from the military hierarchy. Sarah had learned to keep her head down, to work quietly, to avoid drawing attention to herself or her abilities. But the knowledge gnawed at her. Every aircraft she worked on was a reminder of what she had been, what she had lost, and what she might have been able to prevent if she had been braver. The F-35's engine housing lay in pieces around her, each component telling a story of stress and strain that the day shift had been unable to read. Sarah began the delicate process of repair, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had performed this operation dozens of times under combat conditions. As she worked, other members of the night shift drifted through the hangar, performing their own maintenance tasks. They nodded to her politely but maintained their distance, respecting her obvious preference for solitude. They had learned that Sarah Chun was reliable, competent, and uninterested in the social dynamics that dominated military life. Senior Airman Jake Morrison, a young mechanic fresh from technical school, sometimes tried to engage her in conversation. He was curious about her techniques, impressed by her ability to diagnose problems that stumped more experienced personnel. But Sarah deflected his questions with professional courtesy, sharing technical knowledge while revealing nothing about herself. Morrison approached her workstation around 1 a.m., carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the slightly dazed expression of someone still adjusting to night shift schedules. "Chun, you've got that bird torn apart again," he said, gesturing toward the disassembled engine. Day shift spent all afternoon on that thing. What did you find that they missed? Sarah glanced up from her work, noting the genuine curiosity in Morrison's voice. He was a good kid, enthusiastic about learning, untainted by the cynicism that infected so many career military personnel. In another life, she might have taken him under her wing, taught him the advanced techniques that could make the difference between adequate maintenance and excellence. Stress fracture in the engine mount, she replied simply. Harmonic vibration caused metal fatigue. Should be good as new once we replace the damaged components. Morrison peered at the fractured metal, shaking his head in amazement. How'd you spot that? The diagnostics didn't show anything unusual. Sometimes you have to look beyond what the computers tell you, Sarah said, returning to her work. Machines have their own language. You just have to learn how to listen. It was the kind of wisdom that came from years of experience, from working on aircraft that had been pushed to their limits and beyond. Sarah had learned to read the subtle signs of stress and damage that preceded catastrophic failures. In combat zones, that knowledge had saved lives. Here, it simply made her an unusually effective mechanic. As Morrison walked away, Sarah continued her repairs, her mind drifting to the life she had built in the shadows of her former existence. She rented a small apartment off base, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and spent her days off reading technical manuals and maintaining her physical fitness. She had no close friends, no romantic relationships, no connections that might invite scrutiny of her past. It was a lonely existence. But it was safe. She had learned to find satisfaction in the work itself, in the quiet pride of solving complex problems and keeping aircraft operational. Her personnel evaluations were consistently excellent, though she made sure never to exceed expectations by too wide a margin. Competence was acceptable. Excellence might raise questions. The hangar's PA system crackled to life, announcing the 2 a.m. shift change. Sarah had been working for 3 hours straight, completely absorbed in the intricate process of rebuilding the F-35's engine. The other night shift workers were taking their scheduled breaks, but Sarah rarely stopped working. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, drowning out the memories and regrets that haunted her quieter moments. She had almost finished reassembling the engine when she heard the sound that would change everything, the distant whine of incoming aircraft, flying fast and low in the darkness. Sarah's head snapped up, her body going rigid with recognition. She had heard that sound before, during her deployment to Syria. It was the sound of hostile aircraft approaching at attack speed. The base's air defense systems should have detected any unauthorized aircraft long before they reached the Nevada desert. The fact that something was approaching undetected meant either a catastrophic failure of security systems or something far more sinister. Sarah dropped her tools and moved to the hangar's entrance, scanning the star-filled sky for any sign of movement. The desert air was still, carrying sound for miles in the darkness. She could hear the approaching aircraft more clearly now, multiple engines, flying in formation, moving with the purposeful precision of a military strike force. Her hands moved instinctively to her radio, ready to alert base security, but she stopped herself. What would she tell them? That she could identify hostile aircraft by sound alone? That her ears, trained by years of combat experience, could distinguish between friendly and enemy engines? Such knowledge would raise questions about her background that she couldn't answer. Instead, Sarah moved deeper into the hangar, her mind racing through possibilities. If this was a training exercise, someone would have notified the maintenance crews. If it was a security test, there would be protocols in place. The fact that she had heard nothing official meant this was either a massive failure of communication or something far more dangerous. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, and Sarah realized with growing dread that her carefully constructed life of anonymity was about to be shattered. Whatever was coming toward Nellis Air Force Base in the pre-dawn darkness, It was going to force her to choose between maintaining her cover and using the skills that had made her one of the most capable soldiers in the United States Army. The ghost in the hangar was about to discover that some shadows weren't deep enough to hide in forever. Colonel Marcus Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office in the Pentagon, watching the early morning traffic crawl along the Potomac River. At 52, he had perfected the art of appearing respectable while orchestrating activities that would have shocked his subordinates. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his chest bore the ribbons of a distinguished 30-year career in military intelligence. What those ribbons didn't show was the network of corruption he had built over the past decade, selling classified information to the highest bidder while maintaining the facade of a patriotic officer. Blackwood had learned early in his career that loyalty was a luxury he couldn't afford, and that survival in the modern military required pragmatic flexibility. Regarding traditional concepts of honor and duty, the secure phone on his desk buzzed with an encrypted message from his contact in Damascus. The Syrian government was growing impatient with the slow pace of intelligence deliveries, and their Russian advisors were beginning to question whether their American asset was worth the substantial payments they had been making. Blackwood frowned as he read the message, understanding that his carefully constructed double life was becoming increasingly precarious. His empire had begun 5 years earlier when his gambling debts had reached a level that threatened to destroy his career and his family's reputation. Desperate for cash, he had made contact with foreign intelligence services through intermediaries, initially providing low-level information in exchange for enough money to cover his immediate obligations. The arrangement had been meant as a temporary solution, but the money had been too good to resist. Now, Blackwood controlled a network of compromised officers across multiple commands, each one feeding him information that he packaged and sold to various international buyers. The beauty of his system was its compartmentalization. None of his assets knew about the others, and each believed they were working directly for him on legitimate intelligence operations. Major Patricia Steele was his most valuable asset, though she had no idea of her true role in his organization. Currently stationed at Nellis Air Force Base as Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations, Steele provided him with detailed information about experimental aircraft programs, advanced weapon systems, and special operations activities. She believed she was conducting authorized intelligence sharing with allied nations, unaware that her reports were being sold to hostile governments. Blackwood's phone rang, displaying Steele's secure number. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the warm authority that had made him so effective at recruitment. "Patricia, good to hear from you. How are things progressing in Nevada?" Steele's voice carried the strain of someone operating under constant pressure. "Sir, we need to discuss the timeline for the next information transfer. The Russian technical team is scheduled to arrive at Nellis next week for the joint training exercise, and they're expecting detailed specifications on the new electronic warfare systems." Blackwood smiled, though his expression remained professionally neutral. The joint training exercise was a legitimate Pentagon program designed to improve interoperability between American and allied forces. What made it valuable to his foreign clients was the access it provided to classified American technology under the guise of cooperative training. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Excellent work, Patricia. The Pentagon is very pleased with your contributions to international cooperation. Make sure our guests have everything they need to make the exercise successful. Sir, I have some concerns about operational security. There's been increased interest from base personnel in the classified systems we're demonstrating. Some of the maintenance staff are asking questions that suggest they understand more about these technologies than they should. Blackwood's attention sharpened. Curious maintenance personnel could be a problem, especially if they had the technical knowledge to understand what they were seeing. Tell me about these concerns, Patricia. Which personnel are causing issues? There's a night shift mechanic named Sarah Chun who's been working on the aircraft that will be used in the exercise. She's been asking detailed questions about the electronic warfare modifications, and her supervisor says she has an unusual understanding of advanced avionics systems. I've reviewed her personnel file, and her background doesn't explain her level of expertise. The colonel made a note on his desk pad. Anomalies in personnel backgrounds were always concerning, especially when they occurred near sensitive operations. I'll have someone look into Ms. Chun's background more thoroughly. In the meantime, ensure that she has minimal access to the systems that will be demonstrated during the exercise. Sir, that might be difficult. She's been assigned to the maintenance team specifically because of her technical skills. Removing her from the detail might draw unwanted attention. Blackwood considered his options carefully. The success of the joint training exercise was crucial to his long-term relationship with his foreign clients. The Russians were paying premium prices for access to American electronic warfare technology, and the Chinese buyers were equally interested in the advanced radar systems that would be demonstrated. Patricia, I'm going to send you some additional personnel files to review. We've identified several maintenance technicians at other bases who have been asking inappropriate questions about classified systems. I want you to compare their backgrounds with Miss Chin's file and look for patterns. The files Blackwood would send were carefully crafted fabrications, designed to create a narrative that would justify removing problem personnel from sensitive positions. He had used similar tactics to eliminate troublesome officers and enlisted personnel who had gotten too close to his operations. Understood, sir. I'll review the files and take appropriate action if I find any connections. After ending the call, Blackwood turned his attention to the problem of Sarah Chun. His intelligence network included contacts at the Defense Personnel Record Center, where he could access detailed background information on any military personnel. Within an hour, he had Chun's complete file, including classified sections that most officers would never see. The file was interesting. Chun had been a staff sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment before attempting Delta Force selection. Her technical skills were exceptional. Her physical fitness scores were in the 99th percentile, and her psychological evaluations showed remarkable resilience under stress. The file also showed that she had been removed from Delta Force selection for attitude problems related to questioning authority. More concerning was her connection to the Syria operation that had resulted in 12 deaths, including her brother Marcus Chun. Blackwood remembered that mission well. It had been one of his early successes, providing Syrian forces with enough intelligence to ambush an American Special Operations team. The mission had netted him over $2 million and had established his reputation with his foreign clients. The fact that Sarah Chun was now working at Nellis Air Force Base, near another operation he was coordinating, was too much of a coincidence to ignore. Blackwood had survived this long by eliminating threats before they became problems, and Chun's combination of technical skills and personal motivation made her extremely dangerous. He made several phone calls to contacts in the military, police and counterintelligence communities, subtly planting seeds of suspicion about Chin's background. By the end of the week, there would be an investigation into her security clearance, allegations of falsified documents, and enough bureaucratic confusion to remove her from any position where she might cause problems. But Blackwood knew that bureaucratic solutions were slow and unreliable. The joint training exercise was scheduled to begin in 5 days, and Chun was already in position to observe the classified demonstrations. More direct action might be necessary. Meanwhile, at Nellis Air Force Base, Major Steele was implementing her own solution to the Sarah Chun problem. As Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations, she had access to base personnel records and the authority to make security-related decisions about who could access classified materials. Steele had built her career on being proactive about security threats, and she had learned that the best way to handle potential problems was to eliminate them before they became actual problems. Her reputation for thoroughness had earned her rapid promotions and the confidence of senior officers like Colonel Blackwood. What Steele didn't realize was that her proactive approach to security had made her the perfect tool for Blackwood's criminal enterprise. Every threat she eliminated, every investigation she initiated, every security concern she raised served to protect his operations while advancing her own career. She called base security and requested a comprehensive review of Sarah Chun's background, citing concerns about potential security violations. The review would include interviews with Chun's supervisors, analysis of her work patterns, and surveillance of her activities both on and off base. "I want to know everything about this woman," Steele told Captain James Wright, the base security chief. "Her technical knowledge exceeds what her background should provide, and that's a red flag for potential espionage activity." Wright, a by-the-book officer who took security threats seriously, assured Steele that Chun would be thoroughly investigated. He immediately assigned a team of security specialists to begin surveillance, unaware that he was helping to target an innocent woman whose only crime was being too competent at her job. The investigation began that afternoon, with security personnel reviewing Chun's work logs, interviewing her colleagues, and beginning covert surveillance of her activities. They found a woman who worked long hours, kept to herself, and demonstrated technical skills that exceeded her official qualifications. To security professionals trained to look for anomalies, Chun's profile was deeply suspicious. By evening, Wright had compiled a preliminary report that painted Chun as a potential security risk. Her exceptional technical knowledge, combined with her preference for working alone and her reluctance to discuss her background, fit the profile of someone who might be conducting unauthorized intelligence gathering. The report landed on Steele's desk just as she was preparing to leave for the day. As she read through the findings, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The evidence against Chun was circumstantial but convincing, and it would certainly justify removing her from any position where she might access classified information. But Steele was also aware that false accusations could damage her own career if they proved to be unfounded. She needed more concrete evidence before taking action that might attract unwanted attention from higher authority. She decided to accelerate the timeline for the joint training exercise, moving the most sensitive demonstrations to the following week. This would put additional pressure on Chun and her maintenance team, potentially forcing any covert operators to reveal themselves through mistakes or suspicious behavior. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, the trap was being set around Sarah Chun. She had no idea that her competence had marked her as a threat, or that powerful people were already planning her elimination. The ghost in the hangar was about to discover that some shadows contained predators, and that her carefully constructed anonymity had made her the perfect target. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Sarah had learned about survival. But first, she would have to survive the next few days without revealing the skills that had already made her a target. The network of corruption that had destroyed her brother was about to claim another victim, unless she could find a way to turn her greatest weakness, her competence, into her greatest strength. The email arrived in Sarah Chun's work inbox at 6:47 a.m., just as she was completing her shift and preparing to head home. The subject line read, "Mandatory security briefing. Immediate response required," and the sender was listed as Major Patricia Steele, Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations. Sarah stared at the message, her stomach tightening with a familiar dread. In her experience, mandatory security briefings were rarely about actual security. They were usually about control, about reminding people of their place in the hierarchy, about creating paper trails that could be used to justify future actions. The message was brief and formal. All personnel assigned to Joint Training Exercise Crimson, Sky are required to attend a security briefing at 1400 hours. Today in Conference Room Alpha. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to attend will result in immediate removal from the exercise detail. Sarah had never heard of Joint Training Exercise Crimson Sky, and she wasn't aware that she had been assigned to any exercise detail. Her work assignments typically came through her immediate supervisor, Master Sergeant Kelly Rodriguez, not through intelligence officers she had never met. She forwarded the email to Rodriguez with a brief note asking for clarification, then gathered her tools and prepared to leave the hangar. The desert sun was already brutal at 7 a.m., promising another scorching day in the Nevada heat. Sarah walked to her Honda Civic, her mind racing through the possible implications of the mysterious briefing. During her drive to her apartment, Sarah's phone rang. Rodriguez's voice was tight with concern when she answered. "Chun, I just got your message about the security briefing. This is the first I've heard about any joint training exercise, and I sure as hell didn't assign you to any special detail. Something's not right here." Sarah pulled into her apartment complex's parking lot, choosing a spot where she could watch the entrance while they talked. Years of operational security training had taught her to always maintain situational awareness, even during routine conversations. "Sergeant, do you know anything about Major Steele?" "I've never worked with anyone from intelligence operations before." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment before responding. "Steele's been at Nellis for about 2 years. She's got a reputation for being thorough, maybe too thorough. Word is she's been investigating security clearances and looking for problems where there might not be any. Some of the senior NCOs think she's trying to make her mark by finding spies under every rock." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Rodriguez promising to look into the situation through official channels. But Sarah could hear the uncertainty in her supervisor's voice, the recognition that intelligence officers operated by different rules than regular Air Force personnel. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her car for a long time, watching the other residents of her apartment complex go about their morning routines. She had chosen this location specifically because it was populated by young professionals and retirees who minded their own business. People who wouldn't ask questions about a neighbor who worked unusual hours and kept to herself. Her apartment was on the second floor, spartanly furnished but strategically positioned with clear sight lines to all approaches. Sarah had learned to live like someone who might need to leave quickly, keeping her possessions minimal and her escape routes planned. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, her mind analyzing the tactical situation she was facing. The mandatory security briefing was clearly a trap of some kind, but the nature of the trap remained unclear. It could be a fishing expedition, an attempt to pressure her into revealing information about her background. Or it could be something more direct, a prelude to formal charges or administrative action. Sarah opened her laptop and began researching. Major Patricia Steele, using the public information available through military databases and social media. What she found was troubling. Steele had been involved in several high-profile security investigations over the past 2 years, and in each case, the targets had been experienced personnel who had asked questions about classified operations. More disturbing was the pattern of outcomes. Personnel investigated by Steele typically faced one of 3 fates: transfer to less sensitive positions, early retirement, or criminal charges related to security violations. None of the investigations had resulted in convictions, but the careers of the targeted individuals had been effectively ended. Sarah recognized the pattern. It was the same methodology that had been used to eliminate troublesome personnel during her time in special operations, though usually with more subtlety. Someone was using Steele as a weapon to remove threats to their operations, and Sarah had apparently become the latest target. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Jake Morrison. Can you meet me for coffee before the briefing? I need to talk to you about something important." Sarah stared at the message, her instincts screaming warnings. Morrison was the young airman who had been asking questions about her work, the one who had shown genuine interest in learning advanced maintenance techniques. His sudden desire to meet privately was either a coincidence or evidence that he was more than he appeared to be. She typed back, "What do you want to discuss?" The response came quickly, "I can't explain over text. Meet me at the Sunrise Cafe on Charleston Boulevard at noon. Come alone." Sarah deleted the message thread and powered down her phone, her mind racing through possibilities. Morrison could be working for Steele, attempting to gather information that could be used against her. Or he could be genuine, having stumbled onto something that put him in danger as well. The safe play was to ignore the meeting and focus on preparing for the security briefing. But Sarah had learned that safe plays often led to predictable outcomes, and predictable outcomes in hostile environments usually meant defeat. She decided to attend the meeting, but with precautions. Sarah changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a light jacket that concealed the compact pistol she legally carried off base. She drove to the cafe by a circuitous route, checking for surveillance and identifying multiple escape routes. The Sunrise Cafe was a small, locally owned establishment that catered to the military personnel stationed at Nellis. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner booth that provided clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. She ordered coffee and a sandwich, using the time to observe the other patrons and look for anything unusual. Morrison arrived exactly at noon, looking nervous and constantly checking over his shoulder. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. Sarah watched him scan the cafe before approaching her table, noting the way his eyes automatically cataloged potential threats and escape routes. "Thanks for coming," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want to discuss, Morrison?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "My name isn't really Jake Morrison. I'm Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, Military Intelligence. I've been working undercover at Nellis for the past 6 months, investigating corruption in the intelligence division." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her concealed weapon, but Torres noticed the movement and raised his hand slightly, showing that he was unarmed. "I know how this sounds, but I need you to listen. You're in serious danger, and I think I'm the only person who can help you." "Why should I trust you?" Torres pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph of a man in military uniform. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the face. It was Captain Michael Torres, her former commanding officer from the 75th Ranger Regiment. "Captain Torres was my older brother," he said quietly. "He was killed in a helicopter crash 6 months after you left the Rangers. But it wasn't an accident. Someone sabotaged his aircraft because he was asking questions about the Syria operation that killed your brother." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. Michael Torres had been one of the few officers she had truly respected, a man who had seen her potential and helped her develop her skills. Learning that he had been murdered was devastating, but it also confirmed her worst suspicions about the people who had destroyed her career. "How do you know about Syria?" "Because I've been investigating the same network that killed my brother and your brother. Colonel Marcus Blackwood has been selling classified information to foreign governments for years, and he's been eliminating anyone who gets too close to his operations." Torres pulled out a tablet and showed her a complex diagram of connections between various military personnel. At the center was Blackwood, with lines connecting him to dozens of officers across multiple commands. Major Steele is one of his assets. She's been providing him with intelligence from Nellis, and now she's targeting you because your technical skills make you a threat to their operation. Sarah studied the diagram, recognizing several names from her own military service. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, involving personnel at every level of the command structure. "What's their endgame?" she asked. "Next week, they're hosting a joint training exercise with Russian and Chinese military observers. It's supposed to be a legitimate cooperation program, but they're actually planning to provide classified information about our most advanced electronic warfare systems. The foreign observers are intelligence officers who will steal everything they can get their hands on. Torres leaned back in his seat, his expression grim. The security briefing this afternoon is a trap. Steele is going to accuse you of espionage, using your technical knowledge and your brother's death as evidence that you're working for foreign intelligence. They'll arrest you, and while you're fighting the charges, the real spies will complete their mission. Sarah felt the familiar cold fury that had sustained her through her worst moments in special operations. The same people who had killed her brother were now targeting her, using the very skills that had made her valuable to eliminate her as a threat. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want from me?" "I want to stop them," Torres said simply, "but I can't do it alone. I need someone with your skills and your motivation. Someone who understands what we're up against." Sarah considered her options. She could run, disappearing into the civilian world and leaving Torres to fight the conspiracy alone. She could attend the security briefing and try to defend herself against whatever charges they brought. Or she could trust this stranger who claimed to be her former commander's brother and help him expose the truth. "What's your plan?" Torres smiled grimly. "We're going to give them exactly what they want. You're going to walk into that security briefing and let them think they've won. And while they're celebrating their victory, we're going to gather the evidence we need to destroy their entire operation." Sarah looked around the cafe, noting the civilian families enjoying their lunch, the young couples planning their futures, the retirees reading newspapers and discussing politics. These people had no idea that their safety depended on the actions of people like her, people who worked in the shadows to keep the darkness at bay. "What you're proposing is incredibly dangerous," she said. "If we're wrong about any of this, we'll both end up in prison or worse." "My brother died because he tried to do the right thing," Torres replied. "Your brother died because someone betrayed him. How many more people have to die before we stop running and start fighting back?" Sarah finished her coffee, her mind made up. She had spent 3 years hiding in the shadows, working night shifts and avoiding attention. But the shadows weren't deep enough to hide from the kind of people who had destroyed her family. "All right, Sergeant Torres, let's spring their trap." The two operatives spent the next hour planning their strategy, working out the details of how Sarah would survive the security briefing and what intelligence they would need to gather during the joint training exercise. By the time they left the cafe, they had committed to a course of action that would either expose the conspiracy or get them both killed. As Sarah drove back to her apartment to prepare for the afternoon briefing, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. For the first time since her brother's death, she had an ally, a mission, and a chance to strike back at the people who had taken everything from her. The trap was indeed being set, but Sarah Chun was no longer the helpless target they thought she was. She was a hunter, and the hunt was about to begin. Conference Room Alpha was designed to intimidate. The windowless space contained a single long table surrounded by uncomfortable metal chairs, with harsh fluorescent lighting that cast unflattering shadows on everyone present. Sarah Chen entered at exactly 1400 hours, noting the strategic positioning of the participants as she took her assigned seat. Major Patricia Steele sat at the head of the table, flanked by Captain James Wright from Base Security and a civilian contractor Sarah didn't recognize. The contractor's presence was unusual. Civilian personnel were rarely included in military security briefings unless they represented a federal agency with investigative authority. "Thank you for attending, Ms. Chun," Steele began, her voice carrying the cold professionalism of someone delivering a pre-planned script. "I understand you may be confused about why you're here, but I assure you this briefing is necessary for base security." Sarah remained silent, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had spent the previous 2 hours preparing for this confrontation. reviewing everything Torres had told her about the conspiracy and rehearsing the role she would need to play. The key was to appear cooperative while gathering intelligence about their plans. Your supervisor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, has spoken highly of your technical abilities, Steele continued. In fact, your understanding of advanced avionics systems is quite remarkable for someone with your background. The civilian contractor opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. Sarah recognized copies of her personnel file, work performance evaluations, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs of her apartment complex. Miss Chun, I'm Agent David Harrison from the Defense Counterintelligence Agency, the contractor announced. We've been conducting a routine security review of personnel with access to classified systems, and your profile has raised some concerns. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composed exterior. The involvement of DCA was significant. They had the authority to revoke security clearances and initiate criminal investigations. Torres had been right about the seriousness of the trap being set for her. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, Sarah replied evenly. I've always taken security protocols seriously. Agent Harrison smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. I'm sure you have. However, we've identified several anomalies in your background that require clarification. He pulled out a photograph that made Sarah's blood run cold. It showed her brother Marcus in military uniform, standing beside a helicopter in Syria. The image had been taken just days before his death. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, your brother, was killed during a special operations mission in Syria 3 years ago. According to classified reports, the mission failed due to compromised intelligence that led to an enemy ambush. Sarah forced herself to remain motionless, though every instinct screamed at her to react. They were using her brother's death as evidence against her, turning her greatest loss into a weapon for their attack. The interesting thing about that mission, Harrison continued, is that the intelligence was provided through channels that are now under investigation for security breaches. We're exploring the possibility that family members of deceased personnel might have been recruited by foreign intelligence services seeking revenge against the United States. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah understood the narrative they were constructing. She was a grieving sister who had been turned against her own country by enemies seeking to exploit her loss. It was a story that would be believable to investigators who didn't know the truth about her brother's death. Major Steele leaned forward, her voice taking on a sympathetic tone that felt entirely fabricated. Sarah, we understand how difficult it must have been to lose your brother. Grief can make people vulnerable to manipulation, especially when they're contacted by individuals who claim to understand their pain. I've never been contacted by foreign intelligence services, Sarah said quietly. My brother died serving his country, and I honor his memory by doing my job to the best of my abilities. Captain Wright, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Miss Chun, your technical knowledge has been observed to exceed what your training records would indicate. Several of your colleagues have noted that you seem to understand classified systems that aren't covered in standard maintenance manuals. Sarah realized this was the moment Torres had warned her about. They were building a case based on her competence, using her skills as evidence of espionage activity. The irony was staggering. She was being accused of betraying her country by the same people who had actually been selling secrets to foreign governments. I've always been interested in learning, Sarah replied. I study technical manuals in my spare time and try to understand how different systems work together. I believe that knowledge makes me more effective at my job. Agent Harrison pulled out another document, this one showing detailed diagrams of electronic warfare systems. These are classified specifications for the AN/ALQ-99 electronic warfare suite. During a routine inspection last week, you were observed examining these systems with what witnesses described as unusual familiarity. The trap was closing around her, But Sarah noticed something that gave her hope. The documents Harrison was showing her contained subtle inaccuracies, technical details that were almost correct but slightly wrong. She recognized them as the kind of disinformation that intelligence agencies use to identify leaks and track the flow of classified information. Agent Harrison, may I ask who provided these specifications to you? The question clearly caught him off guard. That information is classified and not relevant to this investigation. I'm asking because there are several technical errors in these documents that suggest they may not be authentic. For example, the power consumption figures for the ALK-99 are listed as 2.3 kilowatts, but the actual consumption is 1.8 kilowatts. Similarly, the frequency range shows 2 to 18 gigahertz, but the system actually operates from 2 to 20 gigahertz. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had just demonstrated knowledge that only someone with intimate familiarity with classified systems would possess, but she had also revealed that the documents being used as evidence were fabricated. Major Steele's composure cracked slightly. How would you know those specifications? Because I've worked on those systems before, Sarah replied, deciding that partial truth was her best defense. During my time in the Army, I was assigned to units that use similar electronic warfare equipment. The knowledge has stayed with me. Agent Harrison was frantically shuffling through his documents, clearly trying to determine how his evidence had been compromised. Sarah realized that Torres had been right about the scope of the conspiracy. They were using falsified documents to build cases against their targets, confident that no one would be able to identify the deception. Miss Chun, Captain Wright interjected, your Army records show that you were assigned to maintenance units that wouldn't have had access to classified electronic warfare systems. Captain, with respect, my Army records may not reflect all of my assignments. Some special operations activities aren't documented in standard personnel files. The statement was technically true, though Sarah was being deliberately vague about the nature of her special operations experience. She was walking a tightrope, revealing enough knowledge to defend herself without exposing the full extent of her background. Major Steele stood abruptly, her professional mask slipping to reveal the frustration beneath. Miss Chun, we have reason to believe that you may be involved in unauthorized intelligence activities. We're prepared to recommend suspension of your security clearance, pending a full investigation. Major, I respectfully request that you specify the exact nature of these allegations. As a military dependent and base employee, I have rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and federal employment regulations. The room fell silent again. Sarah had just demonstrated not only technical knowledge but also legal awareness. That suggested she was far more sophisticated than a simple maintenance technician. Agent Harrison and Major Steele exchanged glances, clearly realizing that their carefully planned interrogation was not proceeding as expected. At that moment, the base's emergency alarm system activated, filling the conference room with the distinctive wail of a security alert. Red lights flashed throughout the building, and the automated announcement system began broadcasting. Alert condition red. All personnel report to designated emergency stations. This is not a drill. Captain Wright immediately stood and moved toward the door. We need to evacuate this building immediately. All personnel to the emergency assembly areas. But Sarah was already moving, her body responding to the alarm with trained reflexes that had been honed in combat zones. She recognized the sound of incoming aircraft engines, the distinctive whine of turbojets approaching at high speed and low altitude. Those aren't our aircraft, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Those are foreign engines, probably Russian or Chinese. This base is under attack. Major Steele stared at her in shock. How could you possibly know that? Because I've been shot at by those aircraft before, Sarah replied, her calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of a combat veteran. We have maybe 2 minutes before they reach the primary targets. Agent Harrison was speaking rapidly into his radio, trying to coordinate with base security forces. But Sarah could hear the confusion in the responses. Nellis Air Force Base was not prepared for an actual attack, and the command structure was struggling to respond to an unprecedented threat. The hangar complex will be their primary target, Sarah continued, her mind automatically shifting into tactical analysis mode. They'll want to destroy the aircraft and the classified systems before anyone can protect them. She moved toward the door, but Major Steele blocked her path. Ms. Chun, you're not going anywhere. This could be part of an elaborate deception, designed to allow you to escape custody. Sarah looked at Steele with a mixture of pity and anger. Major, in about 90 seconds, this building is going to be in the target zone of hostile aircraft. You can either continue your investigation or you can help save American lives. Your choice. The sound of jet engines was growing louder, and Sarah could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming missiles. Her combat experience told her that the attackers were using precision-guided munitions, probably targeting specific buildings and aircraft. Torres was right, she said, more to herself than to the others in the room. You're so focused on protecting your operation that you can't see the real threat. Agent Harrison looked up from his radio, his face pale. Base security is reporting multiple aircraft approaching from the south. They're not responding to radio challenges. Sarah pushed past Major Steele and headed for the door. I'm going to the hangar complex. There are people there who need to be evacuated and aircraft that need to be protected. Miss Chen, you're under investigation. You can't just leave. Sarah turned back to face the three people who had been trying to destroy her career. Major, your investigation is based on fabricated evidence provided by the same people who are probably coordinating this attack. Agent Harrison, your documents contain deliberate errors that suggest they came from compromised intelligence sources. And Captain Wright, your base security has been penetrated by people who are using you to eliminate threats to their operation. The first explosion shook the building, sending dust cascading from the ceiling tiles. The lights flickered, and the air conditioning system shut down with a mechanical groan. The choice is yours, Sarah said as she opened the door. You can either help me protect this base, or you can stay here and debate the fine points of your investigation while people die. She stepped into the corridor, where chaos was already beginning to unfold. Military personnel were running toward emergency stations, their training taking over despite the unprecedented nature of the threat. Sarah could hear the sound of aircraft engines directly overhead, and she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Behind her, she heard Major Steele's voice. Right, get base security to the hangar complex. Harrison, contact your agency and tell them we have a major security breach. Sarah smiled grimly as she headed toward the exit. The revelation moment had arrived, but not in the way anyone had expected. The attack on Nellis Air Force Base would expose the conspiracy that had been operating in the shadows, and Sarah Chung was about to discover what it meant to be a hunter instead of prey. The ghost in the hangar was about to become something much more dangerous. The first missile struck Hangar 3 with devastating precision, sending a mushroom cloud of fire and debris into the Nevada sky. Sarah Chun felt the shockwave through the concrete as she sprinted across the base, her combat instincts fully awakened for the first time in 3 years. The attack was surgical, targeting specific buildings that housed the most sensitive aircraft. And Equipment. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres materialized from behind a maintenance building, his cover as Jake Morrison completely abandoned. He carried a military-grade radio and wore tactical gear that revealed his true identity as a Special Operations Intelligence Officer. Sarah, the hangar complex is under coordinated attack. They're using our own intelligence against us. She took cover beside him as another explosion rocked the base. How many hostiles? 6 aircraft, probably Su-35s modified for stealth operations. They're hitting predetermined targets with precision-guided munitions. Someone provided them with detailed base layouts and target priorities. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical implications. This wasn't a random attack. It was a coordinated operation designed to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. The same conspiracy that had been selling secrets to foreign governments was now using those governments to clean up loose ends. Torres, they're not just trying to destroy equipment. They're trying to destroy people. Anyone who might have evidence. About the intelligence leaks. A third explosion sent debris raining down around them. Sarah could see personnel running from the damaged buildings, some carrying wounded colleagues. The base's emergency response was chaotic. Too many people. We're trying to follow peacetime protocols in what had become a war zone. We need to get to the command center, Torres said, checking his radio. I've been gathering evidence about the conspiracy for months. It's all stored in a secure server, but if they destroy the communications building, they'll destroy the only proof we have, Sarah finished. Where's the backup? Torres grimaced. There isn't one. I was supposed to transfer the files to Washington this weekend, but the attack moved up their timeline. Another wave of aircraft approached from the east, their engines screaming as they lined up for attack runs on the remaining hangars. Sarah counted 6 more aircraft, confirming Torres's intelligence about the size of the attacking force. 12 aircraft total, she observed. This is a full squadron operation, not some rogue attack. Someone with serious authority ordered this. As if summoned by her words, a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. Major Patricia Steele emerged, her professional composure completely shattered. Agent Harrison followed, speaking frantically into a satellite phone. Chun, Torres. Steele shouted over the sound of approaching aircraft. We need to get everyone to the hardened shelters immediately. Sarah studied Steele's face, noting the genuine terror in her eyes. Either the Major was an excellent actress, or she was truly surprised by the attack. Major, did you know this was coming? Of course not. Why would I know about an attack on my own base? Torres moved closer to Steele, his weapon visible but not threatening. Because you've been feeding intelligence to Colonel Blackwood for 2 years. Every security report you've filed, every investigation you've conducted, has been designed to protect his operation. Steele's face went white. That's impossible. Colonel Blackwood is one of the most decorated officers in the Pentagon. He's been helping me identify security threats and protect classified information. Major, Sarah said. Gently, what specific intelligence did you provide to Colonel Blackwood about the joint training exercise? I sent him detailed reports about the Russian and Chinese observers who were supposed to participate. I provided him with security assessments of all personnel who would have access to classified systems. Steele's voice trailed off as the implications became clear. Agent Harrison ended his phone call and approached the group, his expression grim. I just spoke with Washington. The joint training exercise was never authorized by the Pentagon. The foreign military observers were intelligence officers using fabricated credentials. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Sarah looked at Torres, seeing her own understanding reflected in his eyes. The conspiracy had been using legitimate security procedures to gather intelligence for foreign governments. And now those same governments were eliminating the evidence. They played us perfectly, Torres said. Blackwood used Steele's security concerns to identify threats to his operation. He used the fake joint training exercise to provide intelligence to foreign buyers. And now he's using those buyers to eliminate everyone who might expose him. Another explosion, closer this time, sent all 4 of them diving for cover behind the SUV. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of 30 millimeters cannon fire as the attacking aircraft strafed the runway, destroying aircraft that were attempting to take off. We need to move, Sarah said, her combat training taking over. The command center is too obvious a target. They'll hit it next. Where can we go? Steele asked, her voice shaking. Sarah pointed toward a series of concrete bunkers at the edge of the base. Those are hardened ammunition storage facilities. They're built to withstand direct hits from heavy ordnance. If we can reach them, we'll have protection while we figure out our next move. The group began moving toward the bunkers, using buildings and vehicles for cover as the aircraft continued their attack runs. Sarah noticed that the attackers were being methodical, destroying specific targets rather than conducting random bombing. Someone had provided them with detailed intelligence about the base's layout and the location of critical facilities. As they reached the relative safety of the bunkers, Torres's radio crackled with transmissions from base security and emergency response teams. The reports painted a picture of coordinated destruction. The communication center was gone. The command bunker had been hit, and several key personnel were missing or confirmed dead. Torres, how much evidence did you actually gather? Sarah asked. Enough to destroy Blackwood's entire network. Financial records showing payments from foreign governments. Communication intercepts proving the intelligence transfers. Even video surveillance of meetings between compromised officers and foreign agents. And it's all stored in servers that are probably being incinerated right now, Sarah said grimly. Torres shook his head. Not all of it. I kept backup copies of the most critical files in a secure location off base. But I need to get to a secure communication system to transmit them to Washington. Agent Harrison, who had been listening to their conversation, suddenly spoke up. I can help with that. DCA has a secure communication facility about 20 miles from here. If we can reach it, we can transmit your evidence directly to the Pentagon. Sarah studied Harrison's face, looking for signs of deception. The attack had changed everything. People who had been enemies an hour ago were now potential allies, and she needed to make quick decisions about who to trust. Agent Harrison, why should we trust you? An hour ago, you were trying to frame me for espionage. Harrison's laugh was bitter. Because an hour ago, I believed I was investigating a legitimate security threat. Now I realize I was being used by the same people who are trying to kill us. Major Steele, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke. Agent Harrison is right. I've been Colonel Blackwood's tool for 2 years, destroying the careers of good people, because I thought I was protecting national security. We need to stop this before more people die. A new sound filled the air, the distinctive roar of F-22 Raptors approaching at high speed. Sarah looked up to see 6 American fighter aircraft diving toward the attacking force, their weapons systems armed and ready. Base defense is finally responding, Torres observed, but they're too late to prevent the damage. The aerial battle that followed was brief but intense. The attacking aircraft, revealed now as modified Su-35 flankers, attempted to escape after completing their mission. 2 were shot down by the F-22s, but the remaining 4 managed to retreat toward international airspace. As the sound of jet engines faded, Sarah assessed the damage to Nellis Air Force Base. Multiple hangars were destroyed, aircraft were burning on the runway, and smoke columns rose from dozens of secondary fires. The attack had been devastatingly effective, eliminating evidence and creating chaos that would take days to sort out. They bought themselves time, Sarah said. While everyone is focused on damage assessment and casualty reports, Blackwood and his network can destroy any remaining evidence and eliminate potential witnesses. Torres checked his radio again, monitoring the emergency communications that were flooding the airwaves. Sarah, there's something else. The attack wasn't just about destroying evidence. Listen to this. He adjusted the radio frequency, and Sarah heard an official-sounding voice broadcasting what appeared to be a news report. Terrorist attack on Nellis Air Force Base was apparently carried out by domestic extremists with possible foreign connections. Federal authorities are investigating. Links between the attackers and several current and former military personnel who have been under surveillance for potential security violations. The blood drained from Sarah's face as she realized the final piece of Blackwood's plan. The attack would be blamed on domestic terrorists, and the subsequent investigation would target people like her and Torres, people who had been asking uncomfortable questions about classified operations. "They're going to frame us for this," she said quietly. "Everyone who was investigating the conspiracy, everyone who was identified as a threat, were going to be labeled as accomplices to terrorism." Agent Harrison was already on his phone, speaking to his DCA contacts. When he ended the call, his expression was grim. "You're right. Federal arrest warrants are being prepared for a dozen people, including both of you. You're being charged with conspiracy to commit terrorism and providing material support to foreign enemies." Major Steele looked stricken. "This is my fault. Every report I filed, every investigation I conducted, I gave them the information they needed to identify targets and build cases against innocent people." "Major," Sarah said, "you were manipulated by experts. The important thing now is to stop them before they can complete their plan." Torres stood up, his expression determined. "We need to get to that DC communication facility. If we can transmit the evidence to Washington before they can complete their frame-up, we might be able to expose the truth. And if we can't?" Harrison asked. Sarah looked at the smoking ruins of Nellis Air Force Base, thinking about her brother Marcus and Captain Torres and all the other good people who had died because they had trusted the wrong people. "Then we keep fighting until we can. Some things are worth the risk." The group prepared to leave the bunker, knowing that they were now fugitives from their own government. The conspiracy that had destroyed their careers was now trying to destroy their lives. But they had one advantage that Blackwood hadn't counted on. They knew the truth, and they were willing to risk everything to expose it. As they climbed into Agent Harrison's SUV, Sarah felt a familiar sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since her days in special operations. The hunt was finally beginning, and this time, she wasn't going to let the real criminals escape into the shadows. The ghost in the hangar had become something much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. DC communication facility sat in the desert like a fortress of glass and steel, its satellite arrays pointing toward the darkening sky. Sarah Chun crouched behind a ridge overlooking the compound, watching through binoculars as federal agents established a perimeter around the building. They had arrived 30 minutes too late. 50 agents, maybe more, she reported to Torres, who was monitoring radio frequencies on a scanner they'd purchased at a truck stop. "They're not taking any chances." Agent Harrison lowered his own binoculars, his expression defeated. "Blackwood's people got here first. They're using legitimate federal resources to hunt us down while they destroy the evidence." The journey to the communication facility had taken 6 hours through back roads and desert highways, with the 4 fugitives taking turns driving while monitoring news. Reports about the terrorist attack on Nellis Air Force Base. The official narrative was already solidifying. Domestic extremists with military backgrounds had orchestrated the assault, and a manhunt was underway for the conspirators. Sarah's photograph had appeared on every major news network, identified as a disgraced former soldier seeking revenge against the military. The media had somehow obtained her sealed personnel files, including details about her brother's death and her removal from Delta Force selection. The story painted her as a dangerous individual driven by grief and anti-government ideology. "They're using my brother's death to justify their narrative," she said quietly, "making me look like a terrorist while they're the ones who killed him." Major Steele, who had been silent for most of the journey, finally spoke. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I've spent 2 years believing I was protecting national security, but I was actually helping to destroy it. Your brother died because of people like me, people who followed orders without asking hard questions. "Major, you were manipulated by experts," Sarah replied. "The important thing is that you're asking those questions now." Torres finished his radio scan and rejoined the group. "I've got bad news and worse news. The bad news is that federal agencies are coordinating a massive manhunt. Every law enforcement organization from the FBI to local sheriff's departments is looking for us." "What's the worst news?" Harrison asked. "Colonel Blackwood is being promoted to general and assigned to head the Pentagon's new counterterrorism intelligence division. He's being hailed as a hero for exposing the terrorist network that attacked Nellis." Sarah felt a familiar cold rage building in her chest. The same man who had orchestrated the deaths of her brother and Captain Torres was now being rewarded for his crimes. The system that was supposed to protect America was instead protecting its greatest threat. "There has to be another way to get the evidence out," she said. "What about going directly to Congress? Congressional oversight committees have the authority to investigate intelligence operations." Harrison shook his head. "Blackwood's network includes people in Congress. Any information we provide through official channels will be suppressed or discredited. We need a different approach." Torres pulled out a laptop computer and began typing rapidly. "There is one option. I've been in contact with an investigative journalist named Elizabeth Walsh. She's been investigating military corruption for years, and she has contacts in multiple government agencies." "Can we trust her?" Steele asked. "She's the one who first alerted me to irregularities in the Syria operation," Torres replied. "She's been trying to expose this conspiracy for longer than any of us." Sarah studied the DCA facility through her binoculars, noting the positions of the federal agents and the security measures they had implemented. A direct assault would be suicide, but there might be other options. "Torres, can you transmit the evidence over the internet?" "The files are too large and too sensitive for normal internet transmission. I need a secure military communication system with encryption capabilities." "What about a different military facility?" Torres considered the question. "There's a National Guard communications center about 40 miles north of here. It's smaller than this facility, but it should have the encryption capabilities I need." Harrison was already studying a map on his phone. Creech Air Force Base is even closer. It's the Drone Operations Center. They have some of the most advanced communication systems in the military, and some of the heaviest security, Sarah pointed out. Getting into Creech would be like breaking into Fort Knox. As they debated their options, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something about the timing made her answer. Sarah Chun. The voice was familiar, though she hadn't heard it in years. "Sarah, this is General Thomas Bradley. I think we need to talk." Sarah's blood ran cold. Bradley had been the officer who had tried to help Rebecca Hawthorne years ago, but he was also part of the military establishment that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish. "General, if you're calling to negotiate my surrender, you're wasting your time. I'm calling because I've been investigating Colonel Blackwood's activities for the past year. I know about the Syria operation, I know about the intelligence sales, and I know about the attack on Nellis. You're not the terrorists, Sarah. You're the only people who can stop them." Sarah exchanged glances with her companions, noting their mix of hope and suspicion. "General, how do we know you're not part of this conspiracy?" "Because Blackwood tried to have me killed 3 months ago. A car accident that wasn't an accident. I survived, but I realized that the corruption goes deeper than I ever imagined." Torres leaned closer to the phone. "General, this is Staff Sergeant Torres. I have evidence that can destroy Blackwood's entire network, but I need a secure communication system to transmit it to Washington. Sergeant Torres, I've been briefed on your investigation. I have people standing by at the Pentagon who can receive your evidence and act on it immediately. But we need to move fast. Blackwood is planning to eliminate all remaining witnesses within the next 24 hours. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Trusting Bradley could be their salvation or their destruction. But staying hidden in the desert would only delay the inevitable. General, what do you propose? There's a secure communication facility at Yucca Mountain, about 60 miles from your current position. It's operated by the Department of Energy, but it has military-grade encryption systems. I can arrange for you to have access for 1 hour, long enough to transmit the evidence and coordinate with Pentagon investigators. And after that? Bradley's voice was quiet. After that, you'll either be vindicated or you'll be dead. Blackwood won't let you survive if he thinks you're still a threat. Sarah looked at her companions, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. They had reached the point where they had to choose between safety and justice, between survival and truth. General, if we do this and the evidence gets buried, we'll be completely exposed. There won't be any coming back from it. Sarah, your brother died because good people were afraid to take risks. Captain Torres died because he was fighting this battle alone. How many more people have to die before we stop being afraid? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah thought about the 3 years she had spent hiding in the shadows, working night shifts and avoiding attention. She had been safe, but she had also been powerless to prevent others from suffering the same fate as her brother. Torres, how? Much evidence do you actually have? Enough to destroy Blackwood's network and expose every compromised officer in the military. Financial records, communication intercepts, video surveillance, everything we need to prove the conspiracy. And you trust General Bradley? Torres nodded slowly. My brother trusted him. That's good enough for me. Sarah made her decision. General, we'll meet you at Yucca Mountain. But if this is a trap, if you're working with Blackwood, you should know that we won't go down quietly. Sarah, I wouldn't expect anything less from you. I'll see you in 2 hours. As the call ended, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace. For 3 years, she had been running from her past, hiding from her abilities, afraid to trust anyone with the truth about who she really was. Now she was choosing to step back into the light, knowing that it might destroy her, but also knowing that some things were worth the risk. This could be the end of everything, Major Steele said quietly. Or it could be the beginning, Sarah replied. Either way, we'll face it together. The group packed their equipment and prepared to leave their hiding place. As they drove toward Yucca Mountain, Sarah watched the desert landscape pass by, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been a ghost for 3 years, invisible and forgotten. But ghosts, she had learned, were sometimes the only ones who could see the truth. The choice between safety and justice had been made. Now all that remained was to discover whether courage was enough to overcome corruption, and whether the truth was strong enough to survive in a world built on lies. The final confrontation was approaching, and Sarah Chun was ready to discover who she really was when everything else was stripped away. Behind her, the lights of Las Vegas glowed against the desert sky, a reminder of the world she was fighting to protect. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of redemption. The ghost in the hangar had made her choice. Now it was time to see if the world was ready to hear the truth. The communication facility at Yucca Mountain appeared in the distance, its security lights creating a small constellation in the darkness. General Bradley's vehicles were already visible, positioned around the perimeter. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to step out of the shadows forever. Whatever happened next, she would face it as herself, not as a hidden mechanic, not as a disgraced soldier, but as someone who had chosen truth over safety and justice over survival. The final gamble was about to begin. The secure communication room at Yucca Mountain hummed with electronic energy as Staff Sergeant Torres's fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading terabytes of evidence to Pentagon servers. Sarah Chun stood guard by the door, her eyes scanning the facility's corridors for any sign of betrayal. 3 months had passed since that night, And the world had changed in ways none of them could have predicted. General Thomas Bradley monitored the transmission from the main console, his weathered face showing the strain of coordinating the largest counterintelligence operation in military history. The evidence Torres had gathered was devastating. Financial records showing payments from 6 different foreign governments, communication intercepts proving intelligence sales dating back 7 years, and video surveillance documenting meetings between compromised officers and enemy agents. "Upload complete," Torres announced. "Every file, every document, every piece of evidence is now in the hands of Pentagon investigators and congressional oversight committees." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For 3 years, she had carried the burden of her brother's death alone, knowing that his killers were still operating within the system. Now finally the truth was being exposed. What happens next? Major Steele asked. She had been the key to unraveling Blackwood's network, providing insider knowledge about how the conspiracy had operated and identifying other officers who had been compromised. General Bradley turned from the console, his expression grim but determined. "Now we find out how deep the corruption really goes. The evidence you've provided implicates over 40 officers across multiple commands, including 3 generals and a dozen colonels. This investigation will reshape the entire military intelligence community." Agent Harrison, who had been coordinating with his DCA colleagues, approached the group with news. "Colonel Blackwood has been arrested at his Pentagon office. He's being charged with treason, conspiracy, and the murders of 12 soldiers in Syria. The evidence against him is overwhelming." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering her brother Marcus and the other soldiers who had died in that ambush. Justice had been a long time coming, but it was finally arriving. "What about the other compromised officers?" Torres asked. "Mass arrests are happening simultaneously across multiple time zones," Bradley replied. "We're coordinating with allied intelligence services to roll up the entire network. Some of the foreign operatives who participated in the Nellis attack have already been captured. The operation had been planned with military precision. Using the evidence Torres had gathered, Pentagon investigators had identified every member of Blackwood's network and coordinated simultaneous arrests to prevent anyone from escaping or destroying additional evidence. The conspiracy that had operated in the shadows for 7 years was being dismantled in a matter of hours. "Sarah," General Bradley said, "I have something for you." He handed her an official envelope bearing the seal of the Secretary of Defense. Inside was a letter of commendation signed by the highest levels of military leadership, officially recognizing her role in exposing the conspiracy and clearing her name of all charges. "This doesn't bring your brother back," Bradley said quietly, "but it ensures that his death wasn't in vain. The intelligence reforms we're implementing will prevent this kind of betrayal from happening again." Sarah read the letter, noting the formal language that could never capture the personal cost of her 3-year journey from Delta Force candidate to night shift mechanic to reluctant hero. But it was more than vindication, it was acknowledgement that she had been right to keep fighting when everyone else had given up. "General, what about the people who were targeted by this conspiracy? The officers who were falsely accused, the soldiers who died in compromised operations?" "A special Pentagon commission is being established to review every case touched by Blackwood's network. Where possible, we'll restore reputations and provide compensation to families. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start." Torres looked up from his computer, where he had been monitoring news reports about the arrests. "The media is calling it the largest military corruption scandal in American history. Congress is already calling for hearings." Sarah nodded, understanding that the public exposure was as important as the criminal prosecutions. The American people deserved to know how their military had been betrayed from within, and how foreign enemies had exploited that betrayal to gather intelligence and plan attacks. "There's something else," General Bradley continued. The Pentagon is establishing a new counterintelligence review board with authority to investigate potential security breaches across all military branches. They're looking for experienced personnel to lead the organization. Sarah understood what he was offering: a chance to return to active duty, to use her skills in service of her country, to help ensure that what happened to her brother never happened again. It was everything she had lost 3 years ago, offered back with interest. "General, I appreciate the offer, but I need to think about it." Bradley smiled. "Take all the time you need. The offer will remain open." As the group prepared to leave Yucca Mountain, Sarah found herself facing a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could return to the military, accepting the vindication and the opportunity to serve at the highest levels of national security. Or she could choose a different path, using her experiences to help others who found themselves caught in similar situations. 6 months later, Sarah Chun stood in the conference room of the Phoenix Veterans Justice Center, addressing a group of former military personnel who had been wrongfully accused or discharged due to false allegations. The center had been established with funding from the Pentagon settlement with families affected by Blackwood's conspiracy, and Sarah had been chosen to lead it. "The most important thing to understand," she told the group, "is that being right isn't enough. You have to be willing to fight for the truth, even when the system is working against you, even when everyone tells you to give up." Among the attendees was Rebecca Davis, a former Air Force pilot who had been falsely accused of security violations after questioning classified operations. Her case had been one of the first reviewed by the Pentagon Commission, and she had been fully exonerated and offered reinstatement. "Sarah," Rebecca said after the presentation, "I wanted to thank you. Your investigation exposed the network that destroyed my career. I'm returning to active duty next month as a squadron commander." Sarah smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing justice served. "Rebecca, you earned that command through your own courage and competence. I just helped clear the obstacles from your path." Staff Sergeant Torres, now working as the center's chief investigator, approached with a file folder. "Sarah, we've got a new case that might interest you. A Navy SEAL who was discharged after reporting irregularities in a classified operation. The details are similar to what we saw with Blackwood's network." Sarah took the file, scanning the details of another soldier who had been punished for asking the right questions. The work was far from over. Corruption was like cancer, always ready to metastasize in new places. But now there were people dedicated to fighting it, and systems in place to protect those who chose to speak truth to power. "Set up a meeting," she told Torres. "Let's see how we can help." Major Patricia Steele, who had left the military to become a whistleblower advocate, joined them for the weekly case review. Her inside knowledge of how military investigations worked had been invaluable in helping other victims of false accusations. "Sarah," Steele said, "I've been thinking about what you said that night at Nellis, about how sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us become the ones we need protection from. What about it? I think I understand now why you turned down the Pentagon's offer. You realize that real change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from people like us, working from the outside to hold the system accountable." Sarah nodded. "The military is full of good people trying to do the right thing. But it's also a hierarchical system that can be exploited by those who understand how to manipulate it. Someone needs to be watching the watchers." As the meeting concluded, Sarah walked to her office window, looking out at the desert landscape that had become her home. The view reminded her of those long nights at Nellis Air Force Base, when she had hidden in the shadows and dreamed of a day when she could use her skills to make a difference. Her phone buzzed with a text message from General Bradley. "Sarah, wanted you to know that the last of Blackwood's network was arrested this morning. The investigation is complete and the reforms are working. Thank you for your service." Sarah smiled as she typed back, Thank you for believing in the truth. General, the real work is just beginning. After her speech, Sarah was approached by Captain Maria Santos, a young intelligence officer who had been following the Blackwood case closely. Miss Chun, I wanted to thank you for what you did. My older brother was one of the soldiers killed in that Syria operation. For 3 years, my family believed he died because of tactical errors. Learning the truth about what really happened, it's given us closure. Sarah felt the familiar mix of sadness and satisfaction that came from meeting families of the Syria victims. Captain, your brother died serving his country. The fact that he was betrayed by people he trusted doesn't diminish his sacrifice. It makes it more important that we ensure it never happens again. That's why I chose military intelligence, Santos replied. Someone needs to be watching for the next Marcus Blackwood. And someone needs to be watching the watchers, Sarah added. The Phoenix Veterans Justice Center is always looking for good people who understand the importance of accountability. As the reception continued, Sarah found herself in conversation with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the investigative journalist, who had helped expose the conspiracy. Walsh had won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting on the Blackwood Network, and she had become a regular consultant for the Veterans Justice Center. Sarah, I wanted to update you on our latest investigation. We've identified a potential corruption network in the Navy's submarine program. The patterns are similar to what we saw with Blackwood, classified information being sold to foreign buyers, false accusations being used to silence whistleblowers. Sarah's attention sharpened. How? Many people are involved. At least a dozen officers across 3 different commands. The good news is that we have people inside the system now who are willing to come forward. The reforms you helped implement are working. What do you need from the center? Safe haven for the whistleblowers, legal support for the investigation, and your expertise in recognizing the patterns of institutional betrayal. Sarah nodded. You'll have whatever you need. This is exactly why we exist. Later that evening, Sarah returned to her office at the Phoenix Veterans Justice Center. The building had grown significantly since its founding, now occupying an entire floor of a downtown office complex. The center employed 20 full-time staff members and had helped over 300 veterans who had been wrongfully accused or discharged. She found Torres working late in the investigation unit, surrounded by case files on computer screens displaying financial records and communication intercepts. Another late night? She asked. The Navy submarine case is more complex than we initially thought. The corruption network has connections to defense contractors and foreign intelligence services. It's like Blackwood's operation, but with more sophisticated operational security. Sarah pulled up a chair, studying the evidence Torres had compiled. What's our timeline? The key witnesses are ready to testify, but they need protection. Some of them have already received threats. We're coordinating with federal marshals to ensure their safety. And the Pentagon's response? Mixed. The reformed oversight systems are working, but there are still people in positions of authority who prefer to handle these matters quietly. They're worried about public confidence in the military. Sarah understood the tension. The military needed to maintain public trust, while also demonstrating that it could police itself effectively. The balance between transparency and security was delicate. Torres, do you ever regret the choice we made that night at Yucca Mountain? He looked up from his computer, considering the question. You mean, do I regret exposing the truth and saving lives? No, I don't regret that, but I do think about the cost. The careers that were ended, the families that were destroyed, the public trust that was damaged. The careers that were ended belonged to traitors and criminals, Sarah pointed out. The families that were destroyed by the choices those people made. And public trust that's based on lies isn't worth preserving. I know that intellectually, Torres replied. But emotionally, it's harder. When you expose corruption at this level, you're not just going after individuals. You're challenging the entire system. Sarah nodded. That's why this work is so important. We're not just solving individual cases, we're building a culture where asking hard questions is valued, where speaking truth to power is protected, where good people don't have to choose between their careers and their consciences. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Major Steele entered, carrying a folder marked Confidential. Sarah, Torres, I need to brief you on a new development. We've received a request for assistance from the State Department. They believe there's a similar corruption network operating in the diplomatic corps. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. Each new case brought the possibility of saving lives and exposing truth, but also the risk of encountering enemies who had learned from Blackwood's mistakes. What's the scope of the potential problem? Intelligence suggests that classified diplomatic communications have been compromised, possibly leading to the failure of peace negotiations in Eastern Europe. The patterns match what we saw with Blackwood. False accusations against honest diplomats, protection of corrupt officials, and intelligence being sold to hostile governments. Torres leaned back in his chair. The State Department has its own internal security apparatus. Why are they asking for our help? Because they don't know who to trust within their own organization, Steele replied. They need outside expertise from people who have experience with this kind of institutional betrayal. Sarah considered the implications. Expanding their work beyond military cases would increase their impact, but it would also increase the dangers they faced. Diplomatic corruption could involve foreign intelligence services that were far more sophisticated than the Russian and Chinese operatives they had encountered in the Blackwood case. What kind of support are they requesting? Full investigation, witness protection, and testimony before congressional oversight committees. Essentially, they want us to do for the State Department what we did for the Pentagon. Sarah looked at Torres, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. They had built the Phoenix Veterans Justice Center to help military personnel who had been wrongfully accused. But the principles they fought for, truth, accountability, protection of whistleblowers, were relevant to any institution where power could be abused. Patricia, tell the State Department we'll take the case. But we do this on our terms, with our protocols, and with full protection for anyone who comes forward. As Steele left to coordinate with the State Department, Sarah turned to Torres. Are you ready for the next battle? I'm ready, he replied. But I have a question for you. When does this end? When do we get to stop fighting and start living normal lives? Sarah smiled, remembering the conversation she'd had with her brother Marcus years earlier, when he had asked her why she wanted to join special operations despite the dangers. Torres, we stop fighting when there's no one left to fight for. When every institution is accountable, when every whistleblower is protected, when every person who speaks truth to power can do so without fear. Until then, this is our normal life. She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the lights of Phoenix spreading across the desert. Somewhere in those lights were people who were being betrayed by institutions they trusted. People who were facing impossible choices between their principles and their survival. Besides, she added, this isn't just about fighting corruption. It's about building something better. Every person we help, every case we solve, every system we reform, it's all part of creating a world where my brother's sacrifice actually means something. Torres joined her at the window. Sarah, do you think we'll ever get to see that world? I think we're building it every day, she replied. One case at a time, one person at a time, one truth at a time. The Phoenix Veterans Justice Center had become more than an organization. It was a movement. A network of people who understood that democracy required constant vigilance, that freedom required constant protection, that truth required constant defenders. Sarah Chun had found her true calling, not in the shadows of military hangars or the secrecy of special operations, but in the light of transparency and the hope of institutional reform. The ghost in the hangar had become a guardian of democracy itself, and the work would never be finished. But that was exactly the point. Some battles were worth fighting, not because they could be won, but because they had to be fought. Some truths were worth defending, not because they were easy, but because they were necessary. The night shift mechanic had become something she had never expected, a symbol of what was possible when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things in defense of the principles that made their country worth defending. And in the end, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.